Hello everyone, and welcome back to another series with ArtSpark Texas. This series of videos focuses on people, places, and things. Hey everyone, in this series we're going to be talking about three important areas of art: portrait, landscape, and still life. The first three videos are going to help us just understand how to create these pictures more accurately, how to make our portraits look more like the person we're drawing, how to make our landscapes feel more realistic and have space, and how to get our still life objects the right size and in the right place, and also have that depth and dimension. The supplies you'll need for this project are a sheet of watercolor paper, watercolor pencils, a synthetic brush, and a cup of water. But you could certainly do this project with just standard drawing supplies. Welcome to Lesson 4. This will be our second portrait, and today's subject is Maya Angelou. We'll be using this portrait as our reference. First, let's take out our colored pencils. Let's go ahead and sketch in a vertical line and the oval or upside down egg shape for the face. Now you'll notice that Maya Angelou's portrait here is tilted a bit to the left. So we're going to make our center line do the same thing. Our lines for the eyes, our lines for the nose, our lines for the mouth are all tilted at that same angle. And so setting the drawing up for us will just help us remember that everything needs to be drawn slightly angled or tilted. Now we're going to measure and sketch in the eyes. If you recall from our first exercise, we talked about how there would be about an eye width space in between the eyes. And you'll notice that in Maya Angelou's portrait. Also notice there's about an eye width on the outside of each eye. This gives us the temple area, the edge of the face. We'll sketch in those eyes, and then we can drop lines straight down from the inside corner of the eye to give us the width of the nose. Now in Maya Angelou's case, the nostrils of the nose will kind of actually go outside of that line, but it's a good indicator. It's a good way of allowing us to measure the face using the inside corner of the eyes. Next comes the lips. We'll draw a line straight down from the center of the pupils to get the outside edge of the lips. And in this case, that proportion measures up really well. Maya Angelou is a woman, so I know that her bottom and lip proportions are going to be more equal, both full. Her philtrum, that area between the nose and the lips, gives her upper lip a nice V shape. I'm going to go back in and add a little bit of the details. I'll make a shape for the eyebrows, draw in the center of the eyes, and then try to create a chin as well. The chin is always going to be larger than the mouth, so it kind of goes to the outside edges of the mouth, probably even further. Let's take our upside down oval face shape and try to define it quite a bit more. You'll notice that most people's faces taper in at the temple, so that area that's just outside the edge of the eye. Our faces usually go in there, and then they come out for our cheeks. I'm going to use her eyebrows and the bottom of her nose to measure for her ears. I'm going to sketch in a hairline. What's great about her hair is it makes this wonderful shape, and that shape has a fairly hard edge on it, so we can sketch that just like we were sketching an object. I'll measure the outside of the eyes to get the neckline, and then come back in and start on some details like the laugh lines of the cheeks. And since she's a little bit older of a woman in this picture, there's going to be more lines. Don't be afraid to give your picture the lines of wisdom. Your subject has earned those lines, right? In step 2, we'll start sketching for some shadows. Just kind of cleaning up my drawing here, claiming some of those edges, making sure I feel like the shape of the nose. The nose and the lips can be a very detailed area. Other than the shape of the eye, I would say the nose and the lips are probably the most detailed shapes that we have on the face. This is just me sketching in for some shadowed areas. I'm looking at the reference picture. I'm always going back to the reference for it to give me more information on shadows and highlights in particular. Because I'm using a brown watercolor pencil, and that's a darker value, This is going to set me up once I'm watercolor painting for my shadows. So a darker value we're going to use for shadows typically anyway, and watercolor pencil just dissolves in water. So as I start watercolor painting, these lines, if I want to, I can really soften them up as I add water. So I'm just getting the edge of her clothes, now going back and claiming some lines around her cheek. There's some complex shadows that are happening around her left cheek here, kind of where her cheek turns down and where her mouth and chin start to form. There are two different shadows there, and it kind of traps a little space. I had some struggles with this area. I'll be honest, it was probably one of the more complex areas of the face. And you'll find that there are these areas in the face where you really have to focus more attention on, and there are areas where you have to focus less. And that's completely normal. I'm going in and trying to claim some really dark values in the eyes. The eyes sink into our heads, so we know that there are all the shadows that live there. They're very small shapes, so having a pencil actually helps a lot in making the lines. Here pretty soon I'm going to start adding watercolor, but I'm trying to find all the shapes I can first with drawing because I have a little more control with drawing, and then I can find the rest of the details once I'm to my brush. Eyebrows in particular, much easier to do with the watercolor pencil because eyebrows and hair use line, right? And so take advantage of your watercolor pencils in those areas. Brushing is great for getting gradients across the face, so really smooth areas of the face, the cheeks, and a lot of the flesh. But in particular, the hair areas are going to be a little easier with pencil. So you have both, or if you have both, use those pencils and use those watercolor paints appropriately in those two areas. Okay, in step 3, we're going to begin to add in water and start this painting. I'm starting in areas where there's already pigment on the page, right? So I'm going to fill that in first and activate that pigment. And remember, those areas of shadow, I can always make darker later if I need to, but I want to start in the darker areas and then work the paint over to the lighter areas. I'm going through the same process each time I'm painting, starting in the darker areas, pushing it over into the lighter areas. Anytime I use that watercolor pencil, I have to be really careful, and I haven't gotten really great at this yet. But if there is water already on the page, remember it's going to be really dark when we make that mark with a watercolor pencil. So it's best to get all those shadows colored in first with the watercolor pencil and then add water to bring them out. Let them dry in between, and then once it's dry you can put fresh pencil down on and begin to watercolor it in. Any area that we want to stand out, you can just outline. Those hard edges of outlines tend to pop off the page. When I look at my Angelou's portrait, I notice areas around the nose, areas in the cheeks, the eyes, and the lips seem to be the most hard edge areas. And so I want those areas to stand out in my painting just like they do in her photograph. I can erase some of my construction lines at this point. I really don't want them in there, but since they're watercolor pencil, they'll probably blend in as I'm painting anyway. The hair is just a series of complex lines that form shapes. So as I'm putting in the details of the hair, I'm looking for shapes, mainly areas that are darker. So these darker shapes that get made on the outside of the edges of her hair, that dark shape that's there in the center of her hair. and some of the shadowing that happens along the top of her hair. And then I can eventually work in the areas that are more gray, just letting the white of the page and watered down watercolor represent those areas. Notice I haven't really gotten much into color yet, but I wanted to have some fun. I don't have that exact blue-green that's on her top in my set, so I'm just going to use a couple of variations of greens that I do have. I'll sketch those shapes in first with a watercolor pencil, and then I can add some water to activate those. Blending those together. The more water you have on the page, the more you're going to blend those colors in. So I could come back over this once it dries with a blue to try to get that blue-green and just lightly draw the blue over it. But these areas and shapes will work for now. Continue to refine your watercolor portrait by looking for more highlights and shadows. Smaller and smaller, the more detailed your picture will get. I hope you enjoyed this portrait. If you're not familiar with Maya Angelou, please, I encourage you to read some of her work. Thank you for attending class. Thank you to our ArtSpark funders: Texas Commission on the Arts, Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation, St. David's Foundation, Austin Public Library, Cultural Arts, City of Austin, and the Donald D. Hamill Foundation.